All right, everybody. Hello. Welcome to the Doomer Optimism podcast. I am here with Rich Bartlett and Steph Soussloff. We are going to be talking about Rich's Microsolidarity event, inaugural, I believe, North American event. And we've spoken once on this podcast about an event Rich held in Europe. And now we're going to talk about this one as participants. Steph and I were both participants. Rich was a facilitator, probably totally different in a North American context. So yeah, let's just get started. Maybe Rich, you can start by, for those who didn't hear the other episode, what was this event?
So I think of Microsolidarity as the phrase that came out from the gathering actually was a social technology for building trust in small groups. And the point of the trust in small groups is that you can do stuff when you've got high trust that you can't do otherwise, whether that's like emotional stuff about, your development and your painful experiences and like getting advice and support and that kind of thing, or in a more productive way, like a really effective startup, for example. You want like small high trust teams. And then those small groups link up into bigger communities. And so the gathering is like an opportunity to bring together practitioners of microsolidarity. So like community builders and facilitators and people that are interested in groups and like trying to help groups coalesce. And the way that we run these things is very like co-created and emergent and spontaneous and chaotic. Like there's a lot going on that is much more than I can track, which is why I wanted to have multiple people joining in. And I just got a message from Roscoe that he's going to join in 5 minutes too. So we're going to have 4 of us.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So Roscoe is another participant. I would just say at this event, a lot just emerges, and there's, like Rich was saying, there's a lot of chaos, but it allows for a lot of agency if you take it. And there was this moment where I believe it started with Steph talking with Roscoe in a room, and then I think Rich went in, and then I went in, and we had this like really kind of magical moment in this little white room, and out of that we like formed our own little friend group with a little WhatsApp group. And so Roscoe's the fourth of our little friend group that we all obviously really resonated with each other. So it'll be cool to have Roscoe here. All right, Steph, I'll toss it to you. I guess initial impressions. What direction do we want to go from here? Rich, bring Steph in.
Yeah, I want to know, Steph, how familiar was this experience? How out of the blue was it? Like, what's your kind of background coming in? And then what was it like for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, Microsolidarity has been in my orbit since the blog post, probably. But I kind of found it during my grad school research, and then you and I met Rich through one of your first courses. And then I embarked on all these community experiments, and I've been in this kind of dark night of the soul year, like composting a lot of those projects and reorienting. And so because of the nature of my year, like I really haven't been in a lot of community settings. But I would say, like, in general, I was very out of sync with it this year. So it was really hard for me to plan in advance. But it was Rich was like, I'm holding you a spot, like you're coming. You just need to figure out like logistics. And I'm really grateful for that, because if I hadn't kind of had that just like reassurance that I was like welcome and wanted, supported in the environment, I probably would have just like let myself off the hook or something. But I'm so glad I came, because it has really shaped some unfolding for me as we approach the end of this year, and that I can share later. But no, I think I'll wait for Roscoe to hear. But yeah, I think so the nature of the event was that and I know that you guys have done it differently the last time you ran the gathering, but in this gathering, it was almost like there was a skeleton, but within the skeleton, it was mostly open space. And which means that participants are invited to co-create what happens inside of these spaces throughout the day. And I've never been to an in-person gathering of that length that was that co-creative. So I feel like I have a lot of lessons, like individually and collectively from that, from like we've kind of mentioned, the chaos that comes and the role of a facilitator in that context.
Can I just clarify, when we say co-created, what we mean is you sit together at the beginning of the event and propose sessions. You as a participant propose sessions and then describe what the session would be, what you have in mind for the group. And then you put them up onto like a schedule. There's like different times for different sessions, and some of them are happening at the same time. And there's like just a lot of, I mean, it can be things like, talking about the actual tools of being a community organizer, or it can be like something somebody's into, a skill that they want to bring. So a lot of people were bringing like different skills from, various community building contexts that help people work through like I don't know what it's called. People in Teapot use this all the time, like shadow work or something, this kind of stuff, like slightly woo woo for my taste, but I got into it. And then like, for example, I did a session where it was just at the beginning of the event, there was a snow falling, and it was like the first snow falling of the season. It was in Denver. I hadn't seen snow for like, I think several years. So my suggestion was that we go and like play in the snow, and a snowball fight, build snowman, draw in the snow. And then afterwards, at the end of the session, we had to come inside and sit by the wood burning stove and take our socks off and hang them up by the stove. And that was a session. So just to give people an idea of like, it could be whatever you want it to be. And a lot of people came to my session and it was really fun. And then I did a different session on Doomer Optimism, and I asked people to come and like, I explained what was going on with the podcast and asked people to come and give me advice. So just like some context for people to get a sense of like, what were we doing all day in these sessions?
I think I want to say like the design choices that I make are my way of making an argument. And so like running events that way is my argument against all of the other events that are not run that way. And like when I'm thinking about, like the podcast ecosystem of all the thinky boys, the like big brain talk, these kind of gatherings that sometimes happen where you pull all these like really smart people together and you put them on stage and they talk and they say they're like it's kind of inspiring in some way, like while you're listening to it, but then half an hour later, you couldn't even really recite what were the take-home messages, and that we try and build community around idolizing these like super intellectual people and trying to get close to them, or like trying to impersonate them somehow. Like, oh, maybe if I was super intellectual and I could speak with this level of abstraction, then I would fit in and I'd have my place. And I'm just like, so I find that so unpleasant that I lead in a completely different way.
Yeah. So show, not tell. Was what is basically your method of making an argument.
Yeah.
I want to acknowledge that Roscoe is joining us. I think he's getting himself set up. What's up? Welcome. We're just kind of going around and briefly discussing what the event was, the Microsolidarity event, and then hopefully we'll get into different details about how it was for us. But maybe Roscoe, you can briefly give us an overview, or Rich, maybe you should
maybe I listen a little bit and join the stream.
Okay, sounds good.
Hello, nice to see you all.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, pleasure.
So Steph, you were going in a direction when I came to clarify some of the details. Did you want to continue on that, or?
Well, I feel like just to orient us, we're in a bit of like a what happened, just like laying the landscape. I think where I was going to go was a little bit of like making meaning of what happened. So I don't want to take us too quickly in that direction. If there's more that we want to just like put on the canvas.
Yeah, you know what? I want to just explicitly say, for maybe people who are like trying to wrap their head around like what kind of people are here. It was like in my experience, like more, I don't know if it's correct to say this, but I'm just going to say this, my impression, like more left leaning, slightly more woo leaning, slightly like more, I mean, it's not like farmers or something, you know, it's not like working class people. It's like people who work in some sort of usually like urban-ish. I think it's like, I have no judgment about that, but just a sense that like, I mean, and it was held at this retreat center that was, I believe, founded out of the Burning Man community. So just to like give you an idea of like the milieu, the cultural milieu it was. But having said that, there was huge diversity of within the participants. It was definitely heterogeneous.
Actually, do you know this distinction? I don't know who coined it, but it's like a sociological distinction between somewheres and anywheres.
I've heard of it, but maybe you should.
I think it's cool. It's like the working class people that you mentioned, they're somewhere. They live in a place and they know their neighbors, and they're like got some kind of orientation, and multiple generations have been in more or less the same place, and they've got that kind of reference point. And then you have the anywheres, who are like urban people who like could be anywhere. It's like I can just move to the other side of the continent and my life looks the same.
Yeah.
And so I think it's mostly a gathering of anywheres.
Yeah.
And we're doing this kind of, I think of it as like remedial work to like, we're missing the social fabric that people have when they live in a place.
Yeah.
And how do we compensate for that? Like if we're all these like hypermobile digital people, virtual people that are living in the cloud, like how do we get plugged back into community, relationship, place? And maybe the place is even going to be mostly virtual, but like how are we going to have more of that, not just like companionship and care, but also like accountability and discipline sometimes, and like that rigorous collision that happens when you live as neighbors and you have to deal with each other.
Yeah. And I just want to briefly say before we jump back to either Roscoe or Steph, I haven't said this on this podcast explicitly, but there's a lot of pushback from, let's just, if we put it in the terms of like agriculture, for example, like the old timers who have like always done agriculture, always done hunting and fishing. And then these newcomers like get into hunting and fishing and they're saying like they're hipsters or whatever, or yuppies. There's a lot of pushback on that. And I would push back on the pushback. Like, I think it's actually wholesome and good for people to learn these things, to learn how to be good neighbors, to learn how to work together in a group. And there are better and worse ways to do it, but I don't want to like just make fun of people for not having that place or those skills. And I think that's really harmful. And part of an active goal of this podcast is to bring like the anywheres into these, skill sets, or thinking about these things is like important. But anyways, I've just wanted to get that out because I've never said it here, and I strongly believe it.
It's the big welcome.
Say more.
Well, if I riff off of what you were saying, Rich, about going from anywhere to somewhere, I did feel at the Microsolidarity event a strong welcome to everybody to step in as fully as you want and as fully as you're capable, without a kind of sense of humor about where you're coming from, right? I mean, yes, there's lots of opportunity for the inner eye roll about some of the cultural code that shows up at the woo-woo world, but that's not really what it's about. The goal is to step through that, even to step through the frictions of different cultural code in order to show up. And I don't know, I'm aware I'm stepping into an ongoing conversation. But one of the main things I experienced about the microsolidarity model, as opposed to other models for community and community belonging that I'm more familiar with, is the microsolidarity feels like real life, in the sense that there's a lot of opportunity to show up or not show up. And people put out a desire to be met in a certain way. Sometimes it doesn't happen, right? That's not where the vibe is. And so the navigation of the risk of putting out a desire and perhaps not having it met because it's actually not the collective, doesn't touch something in the collective, is actually a lot like how real life works, right? Not everybody wants to play your game. And a lot of community models, at least, well, a lot of come together for a weekend community models are based on the idea that everybody's going to show up and everybody is going to play well with each other. And so one of the things that's beautiful actually about the microsolidarity model is there were hurt feelings going on, left outnesses or disappointments, which seems to me to be really important to learn how to navigate that. It's real.
Yeah, it's hard for me to say that. I'm glad you can say that people's hurt feeling is like part of what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, right.
It's one of the learning objectives.
Yeah, navigating hurt feeling is an important skill. Okay, let's get on with it. Right.
So, and it's not the destination. I mean, the destination, I describe it as that in this context, leadership is the ability to make a compelling invitation. So it's like, right. What does it take for you to be able to offer something and have people excited about saying yes? It gets very sophisticated. And you need to practice and you need to get it wrong a bunch of times. Or else you can just amass a bunch of power and force people to do it your way. That works too.
But it's not as much fun, actually.
No, and I think there is something like, so it's just this container where people are like sort of forced to take a leadership role or, forced to participate in a way that has real stakes. And I think there's a tension there. If you had a very top-down controlled environment that, Rich, you decided this is what we're going to do. We're going to have X, Y, and Z person speak, and it's all controlled. You could avoid all of that, but that's totally the opposite of the point. The point is to force people to I think this is perfect way you said it, Roscoe. Force people to participate in a way that has real stakes and navigate those things. I don't know, Steph, did you experience things this way?
Well, what I'm reflecting on is how, like, the retreat, it has a meta framing in the sense that it's like, I mean, Microsolidarity does in general. It's attracting community builders who want to bring back learnings to the communities that they're building. But I imagine it's a bit of a humbling experience as a community builder. Like I guess I didn't have that hat on going into the retreat, so I didn't feel as much of a gap. But there was this diversity of how people were approaching the experience. And some, I think, were holding more of this like researcher abstract lens of like, let me acquire some tools and frames to bring back to my community. But what it really was like a experiential immersion of creating community so that one can almost understand the messiness of it and have to like reorient and make sense and embody these learnings to then ultimately show up as a better practitioner. I think that was like the dance that we were doing. And in some ways where I was most pleasantly surprised. And I feel like I walked away with a new embodied definition of what microsolidarity means to me. And yeah, to me, that's the beauty of it, of just like being in the chaos together and having these hurt feelings and the confusion. And even though there's the like customer rating might be a little bit lower than if it was a bit more explicit or structured, or the NPS score.
I should also say, maybe, or Rich, you can talk about the model of having crews is really important, and what's behind that, because it's not just that we created these sessions, it's also we had various sets of belonging to different groups and built trust over those relationships that then like really colored what the experience was like in the sessions.
Yeah. So to go back to this like somewhere versus anywhere thing, like a somewhere, the most somewhere people in the world are indigenous people, right? Like they've got this like ancient connection to a certain place. And one of the things about coming from New Zealand is that I grew up alongside indigenous people, like not in their culture, but like as neighbors looking over the fence. And in indigenous Maori culture, you have the marae, the meeting house. And the marae it's like a campus, you know, there's like, there's patterns of architecture of like, okay, there's this thing that happens in the front, and then there's this thing that happens inside the meeting house, and then there's a kitchen, and there's all these like different architectural components that are designed to remind the people about how do we encounter each other in a generative way. And one of the things that I've heard from the peace building movement in New Zealand is like, you non-indigenous people need to build your marae. You need to build up a patterns of encounter so that you know how to have peaceful relations. And once you figure that out, then you can come and meet us as equals, you know, and we'll have a partnership. We can talk. But you're so disorganized and clueless about, like, as soon as you get 3 people in the room, they're all like at each other's throats. Like you need to sort your shit out. So for me, kind of what we're doing is like trying to, it's ambitious to build physical structures, right? So I'm not doing that yet, but just in the, like I said, a social technology, like we're designing social architectures to kind of simulate the meeting house and say like, what are the essential pillars? And it's like, you need to have some kind of opening. There needs to be some kind of, and like Roscoe, you arrived in this meeting, you're like, oh, I'm conscious that I'm landing and I missed the opening, you know? That's an anchor that helps us feel settled as a group. It's like we all landed at the opening and we got some shared context. And then you described, Ashley, like, okay, we're going to populate this agenda using what we call open space technology. Like that's actually a very specific formulation from Owen Harrison. I always get that name back to front. Doesn't matter. And then the other essential thing for me is the crew. So as an organizer, we assign everyone, all the participants assigned into small groups. In this case, there were groups of 4, which I think was ideal. Sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller, doesn't matter. But it's this idea that every day you're going to meet with the same little crew. And it's this point of stability amongst all the chaos and emergence. And you're going to just keep coming back and keep coming back and keep coming back to that group. And you're like, oh, right, it's you. These are the people that I'm getting to know at a deeper level. These are the people that see me and trust me. Like Jordan said, if I have the experience of feeling heard and witnessed in the small group, I feel it kind of ripples out and I feel much stronger sense of belonging to the large group. Mm-hmm. And one of the challenging things I think that Roscoe was kind of pointing at with other ways of hosting these community gatherings is that you have 30 people or 50 people and everyone wants to be witnessed. Everyone wants to feel heard by the whole group, and there's just not enough time. It's just the physics just doesn't work. The social physics doesn't work out, and so that's why we put people into these small groups so that you can get that need to be heard and that personal attention and that little corrective nudge that you need at just the right moment to say, "Hey, man, you're tripping. Like, snap out of it." It's so much easier for that to happen in a small group, and that's why we put the crews in there. So the crews is like another aspect of this architecture that seems really crucial. And I feel like there might be 1 or 2 other pillars that we don't know about yet that we need to bolt on, and then it will feel really stable and our customer satisfaction scores will go through the roof.
Well, the other thing about crews that I got in a strong way from the gathering is continuity after the event. So my practices are often in the how do you get 22 people to connect as one group and hear each other? And there are technologies that are cumbersome for that, but they work. But then when the event's over, the group is over, because the 22 are not going to stay connected. There's just no way that'll happen. So one of the things I really could feel in this model is, well, right now the 4 of us are connected. It's what, 3 weeks, 4 weeks later. And I heard you explicitly say that, Rich, at one point, that the outcome, potentially even the outcome that's being designed for, is who are you going to be hanging with 6 months later? And maybe who are you going to work with? So the sense of, it's not just to gather in order to have an experience for 2.5 days. It's to gather in order to find the people that you can be productive with in the world. And that does require the small group model, because the 24 of us or 28 of us who were there are not going to stay connected.
Yeah. And Roscoe, for me, it's like as an organizer, I can assign you into crews. I don't have much confidence that that's going to be the right configuration of people, but at least you get the feeling of like, oh yeah, I want this in my life. Like I want to have 4 people that I show up to on a regular basis. These were just the wrong people. Now I go home and I like swap in the right people and like, there we are. This is what I was missing all my life, or this is what I'm missing right now. And it's a way of getting at one of the essential principles for me, which is about pluralism, that each of the crews develops their own center of gravity, like their own political ideology, almost like their own cluster of values, their own in-jokes, their own ways of being, that kind of, there's these like little clusters of difference, little clusters of sameness in a wider context of difference. And that's the essential muscle for me of like, how do you be a decent citizen in a multicultural planet? Like you need to be able to find your crew without expecting and expect a bit of connection and unity at that small scale, and not expect the large scale to agree with you, not expect the whole group to have your same in-jokes or understand your same subculture or share your same values in the same way. And that's the other like muscle we're trying to train there.
I just briefly want to describe one other thing, which is you don't have to get along with everybody here. And there's a way in which, as a participant, I'm getting a sense of people's like vibes, and it's like honing your intuition, which is cool. Like it's an invitation to hone your intuition. Like, look, I'm drawn to this person. They seem interesting to me. I'd like to get to know them further. If you do, can you guys hear me? It's telling me my connection's unstable. Testing. Are you back? Am I back?
You're a little bit frozen.
Okay. Am I testing? Am I back? Let me turn my video off and back on. Can you hear me? I'll just cut this part out. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think you're back.
Okay. Am I back?
Went through a portal.
Okay.
You've come through the portal, yeah.
It happens all the time. Side. Okay, so anyways, I would just say...
You're just driving through a tunnel.
Yeah. So anyways, I would just say, like, basically you can hone your intuition at this kind of event by, like, seeing who's interesting to you. And then if you want to, as a participant, you can go to their sessions. And then you're like, oh, this is super intrigues me, or like, oh no, this really turns me off. And then you can, if you're interested in the person, build more trust and deeper relationship. But I would say what's cool about the cruise, at least for me, was you don't necessarily have to be drawn to the people to build trust and to find like common ground. And that's really, really key to a lot of what we talk about on Doomer Optimism, like just be a good like be neighborly. And being neighborly doesn't mean finding a gated community where everyone thinks exactly like you. Being neighborly is working together across or despite difference.
I wondered, Ashley, if we could kind of drop down a level to what each of you are doing in the world and what's the relevance of these practices to the material reality that you're trying to push around. Don't have to go to the physics, Roscoe. I know you prefer the metaphysics. We can also go there.
I'll follow someone else's cue. So that's good.
Steph, do you want to go? Because I have a ready-made answer, but I talk too much.
Yeah, I can try to go in a succinct enough way. I mean, I've always felt I have some role to play in inviting, like, I often feel like I'm an invisible leader in groups. And the tragedy of that story throughout my life has been that, like, nobody sees me, and I don't ever get any credit. People take advantage. But I've been over the past couple of years, like, trying to hone and see that as a gift, and like how as a seeder of collaborative community. And I'm really interested in intergenerational like social fabric as a way to support this chaos that we are moving through together. So that's like, I guess that's like a very light framing. Meanwhile, as in anywhere, when I think I mentioned this a little bit briefly, but my world kind of turned upside down at the end of last year in many ways in terms of my belonging needs. And it was humbling for me because I went from feeling like I was resourced to be like talking and thinking about these big, ideas, to like not having those needs met in my day-to-day life. And so I really came to, the clashing of me being this like big thinker and seer and like desirer, to also like not knowing where to live or who to be around physically, and how to resource myself in the day-to-day, like kind of came to a head at this event for me. And where I'm kind of forgetting what your question was, but just to make sure I don't go down a rabbit hole.
No, yeah, keep going. It's basically, it's basically, well, how is this going to be relevant for your
yeah. So I guess the biggest other piece of context is like the context in which I became interested in microsolidarity was this thesis project that I did at my grad program around meta-modern millennials. So like I was in this quite like abstract realm of like, what does it mean to be, like, what is the next generation of and capacity of leadership needed in millennial generation to like in this form of repair, to like, who am I to be like thinking or talking about those things if my life feels like a disaster? And so I have really like been working at small scale. Most of this year, just the scale of myself and my parts and my shadow work. But feeling really ready to step a bit more out and into the world. And being at this gathering really helped me reorient to like the building blocks. And like, to me, it's like I think in the past I was more like microsolidarity. And then in this environment, I was like micro. Like, oh, like it truly was like being hit over my third eye or something. And I, ever since the event, which was about a month ago now, I've really been allowing myself to be like hyper focused on this question of place and belonging for me. And I've pretty much just been in this like deep inquiry, and it's quite painful at times around like, where do I want to plant my feet so that I can be fully resourced in my belonging needs, so that I can step into larger capacities and questions. And so yeah, through like really the event helped me seed this inquiry, which has led me to a decision of like wanting to lean more into being a somewhere, like be like the like tragedy of being in anywhere to like the new challenges that will come, but the excitement of being a somewhere. I've decided to move back essentially to my like hometown. And yeah. And like,
I just have to like jump in. Like there was a moment where you and I, after the event, we found my Twitter and we were talking about like Jason and Doomer Optimism. You're like, oh, I followed Jason for a while already, and I didn't really realize like you guys all existed. And then you were like, I looked at your Twitter, and this is what I want. And I was like, at what part? And you're like, the homesteading, like belonging someplace, like, you know, I thought that was that was like the best moment for me. That was such a great, a realization you were having.
I want to jump on this too, the generational gap here. Like I'm thinking about my parents. They're in their late 60s. They live in rural New Zealand. They've got a homestead. We don't call it that. It's just like where you live. Yeah. And, you know, dad was a cop, mum was a kindergarten teacher. And so between them, they know every single person in town. And they know whose people are whose people as well. You know, like they understand the whole network of who's who. And I don't think they would know what you're talking about, Steph, when you said like, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to be resourced and how I'm going to get my belonging needs met. It's just like, that's just not in their field of it's like, they just take it for granted that, of course, I know 20,000 people by face, you know, of course, that's just normal. Mm-hmm. And there's this whole older generation who takes that for granted. And then there's these younger generations who are progressively more and more and more isolated to the point now where it's extremely normal for young people to not have one friend that they can really be transparent with. Like that's the new normal. And I think there's like such a lack of mutual understanding of that. There's like such a massive gap there that people just don't get. And so like having you, like learn how to articulate that in a way that crosses that boundary, I think is so crucial.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I essentially tried the digital nomad thing this year and it was awful. Like, and my biggest insight was that I was out of like somatic rhythm with anyone. It was just like I was a floating atom. And therefore the biggest insight for me was that no one could rely on me because I was so unpredictable in my patterns geographically that people in my life who used to know that they could like see me on Wednesday at this place or like call me at this time because they knew my schedule. There was no one who knew what I was doing. And there was moments of that being like this liberating, like ecstasy of like, I could be anyone and could do anything. But like my after evaluating those experiences, it's like, I wouldn't trade that for that sense of like freedom for these like animal needs of like knowing that you like, just that familiarity and that the capacity for others to rely on you. Not just having people to rely on and like the gift that it is to be able to support someone and being that source for them.
Totally. Roscoe, do you want to go?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things I got out of the gathering was I got to be the old guy. Speaking of intergenerational transfer. And, So the two things, one was to delight in the clarification of at this age and now that I have this number of decades of experience in groups and experiences in guiding people's development, to see that as a very sweet side ingredient. So I was aware that this is the first time I've been in a group weekend process where I haven't actually been at the front of the room. And so in addition to nursing my hurt feelings that I'm not getting the gaze of being the guy at the front of the room, it was very powerful to recognize the potency of this side location. And I think by the time we were done, Rich, you were calling me, Uncle Roscoe, with different modifiers on the uncle part. The other piece is, yes, the metaphysics and meta things, meta psychologies, meta modernism thrill me. And the work I'm interested in doing in this next decade is walking those models into forms to get them in the hands of practitioners. So I work as a therapist, and I'm often aware of how poorly formed and often outdated the meta is in most therapists. There's a kind of grab bag of kind of mid 20th century framings for what a human is and what a therapeutic encounter is and how we ought to relate to psychopathology. And I see myself as a bridge person, because I actually I'm pretty good at knowing the complexity and digesting the complexity of the meta and then translating it. The place I keep stumbling is I'm not doing it with a crew. So the gift for me in coming out of the Microsolidarity weekend is, oh, right, focus less on the thing, like the structure, the model. I've got 7 different half-formed, well, if you could get a group of people together and you could do this and this and this and this, to recognize that I'm actually not an entrepreneurial type in that way. So the piece that I'm hungry for and more clarified that I'm looking for is who to do it with. And there's something enormously important, actually, about getting clear, potent, and contemporarily accurate models into the hands of the people who are doing the work. Being therapists, being teachers, being, the manager at the office, a more accurate understanding of who a human actually is actually fundamentally necessary for us figuring out how to navigate the craziness, right? Including actually your neighbors, right? If you actually have an accurate map of who the self is and what the needs of a human are, then it actually helps you be a better neighbor. So,
Roscoe,
so that's what I got from it.
Can you say a word or two about what you imagine you can do with a crew that you can't do alone?
It's a distribution of task, right? Like, the problem is it is actually a very complex skill set that it takes to do what I was just mapping out, and I don't have all those skills. And so if I'm telling a story that I need to be a solo operator, in a lot of ways, if I live into the, the American myth of the powerful individual who will declare himself and manifest, which is also one of the liabilities of our psychology, right? I mean, our dominant psychology is health is autonomy. And, if it's not working, go inside and figure out what you need to do to make it work. So precisely to get out of that. I think you and I joked when we were there, like, I don't know a lot of people. Like, part of the stumbling block for some of these things I dream of is, who are the practitioners who would actually want to learn this material? You've got a big Rolodex, right? Steph, you have a capacity to be a weaver and a supporter of the process in a way that I don't. Awesome, right? So it's about distributed labor with a recognition that we need a wide range of skill sets to pull off something.
So for me, it was really cool to hear some stories from Roscoe when we were there about various mentor relationships that you have had in your life, and like older males, and I think there's something just incredibly powerful in that model. And it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody older, but like somebody who is in a mentorship capacity. And I think about I have one uncle who is like kind of a wild card, black sheep type. So of course we gravitate to one another. And he was in AA, and one of the things they said in AA was just all you can really do is make the next right decision. And just having that like mentor, like just that moment where he told me that, like that has been a guiding light for me for years. And it was just like it was one small conversation we had. So I think to be more explicit about it, I think part of what I was interested in seeing is how Rich's model works. And I think what I took out of it is like, I'm already intuitively doing this explicit thing that Rich is doing, which is to try to recreate social technology that's very common around for 99 whatever percent of human history for almost all of the world, and that has been ripped away from us, and sort of to like explicitly explain to people what it is, and then to show them to the extent that I'm able to how it's done. But I would say like Rich is a step ahead of Doomer Optimism in the way of like showing, because it's actually like having these embodied experiences where you can just show, not tell. Although we do a version of it with the Doomer Optimist camp where people come and like slaughter a chicken or something, and it's like you don't have to tell them. Like we've been talking about this a little bit. Like everybody wants to go to some camp where they're like being told that they're going to have this like spiritual awakening. You know, like everyone wants that to be marketed to them. But what I think is so much better is to tell them they're just going to come and work on a farm, and then to have a spiritual awakening accidentally by slaughtering a chicken and working side by side with people and then laughing and having some beers after. It's so like embarrassing in some ways to say some of this stuff out loud, because it's just like my parents are just like laughing. Tucker Max and Jack Murphy were on this podcast, and they're like pretty successful guys, and they were talking about how they didn't know what an impact drill was. And my parents have recently become interested in the podcast and started watching it, and my dad was like laughing his ass off apparently, because he's like Chicago firefighter, that they're like in their 40s and they don't know what an impact drill is. Some of this stuff is like, so it's very funny, but I still think it's useful. It's necessary. A lot of us like just need these things said explicitly. And then for me, the insight for me personally as like a person who's wanting to weave these things together was like, I need more mentors and peers, like Roscoe was saying, like who can help me navigate this stuff and help to weave these things together, because it is it's immensely complicated, I think. To hold a lot of these frames in mind. We don't have necessarily a shared culture. And so just like metamodernism in general is just trying to like navigate these like various, I think Roscoe, you called it paradigms. Like you've got these paradigms you get into for a while and you use them when they're useful, but you're still weaving together like all of your whole life's experience, and also trying to meet other people where they're at. And like, it's just a lot. It's just so complicated. And so having other people to bounce those things off of is, I think, essential. And like a mentor or peer relationship is, people try to go it alone too much, for sure. You know what, I'm interested to hear like more stories from the event, like of what actually.
I have a story coming up around the crew.
Okay. Yeah, let's hear it. Let's hear it.
Well, I was just thinking about how, I spent much of this year in this inquiry of like, who am I now? And like all this time, like alone in nature, which in some ways was really necessary. But what I came to was like, I am no one except what I am in relationship to another. So like, I had this insight in the forest, and like, I'm the trees and the moss, and and I had this is kind of what you were going at, like, I'm tagging this for later, but something around like peak experience and how a lot of retreats like work towards having creating this like peak spiritual experience, and that often comes through like the sense of like belonging to the whole. And there's a lot of and so I just want to like tag that for later because it's somewhat related, but because what I heard you saying, Ashley, about your doomer optimism camps, that sounds similar to the Microsolidarity Retreat, is that that's not the goal, and that you might find that inside the crew level, but at the whole, it's more just like real life, and there's like confusion, and maybe the peak experience comes in an unexpected way, but we're not like creating this like, yeah. Anyways, one of the peak experiences, I was like calling in for my thinking what I needed to get my belonging needs met was this idea of like a sisterhood. It's like, I'm going to find these women who are similarly like on this like journey, and we're going to rise together. And it was like it was like a day and a half into the retreat. And actually, I think it was you, Rich, who was like, I don't think anyone's like, there's not enough flirting happening. Like, I don't think anyone's like, dating or you're running into the woods together. And I was like, yeah, well, that's not what I was looking for. But I was looking for my sisterhood, and I don't feel like I found that. And through me naming that, it kind of planted the seed of like what I was calling in. And that's actually what this crew now calls itself. And this crew formed like later the next day or something, in this kind of organic way that we named earlier. But yeah, we have a WhatsApp group called the Sisterhood. And I just like that because what it's shown me is that like what you're looking for might not come in the form that you think it will, but that your crew, and it's not about having like, at least for me, it's more about the quality of relationship and less about the quantity. So I could have seen this crew and been like, oh, well, I still got to go find my perfect like women's circle. And what it's showing me is that like, no, your crew can take on forms that each person of the need of each person. So for me, it's a sisterhood. For you, it might be something else. And I'm able to like approach it as that for now. And then my need might shift, and I can lean on the crew in other ways. But yeah.
I can pick up just a little on that, Steph, about the kind of kaleidoscope of different meanings. So like one of the recurring questions that I've had as an organizer, as a host, as someone who has a position of authority in the group, is like, yeah, what to do about sexuality, like in general, like the way that sexuality plays a role in belonging. That like one of the ways to belong is that you find someone to hook up with, and you're like, aha, I got my person. But then also specifically for me in that role, how do I, like when I'm the center of attention, like Roscoe was talking about, like receiving all of that energy, how do I stay clean if it's like sometimes there's like this mutual spark of erotic attraction, and it's like generally rule of thumb is like I want to just keep that clean and distant, and like we don't cross that line. And so for me to have like a co-ed crew emerge, and we just call it sisterhood, it's like, oh, these are my sisters, great. Like that just gave me a lens of like, okay, this is a place for companionship. And they're like, I've got two sisters at home. Like I know what sisters are for. Sisters are great. I love having a sister, So that's like a completely different, I think, from what you're describing, what you were calling in. But it's like, oh yeah, I need my sisters. So like, that's an illustration, I think, of the kind of pluralism that I want to go for. That like people just have completely different interpretations of the same word, and that's normal.
Roscoe, do you have any stories you want to share?
Well, when you prompted the story piece, I actually went to a kind of collective peak experience, which following your comment and stuff, I was like, oh, interesting. That might just be a habit of interpretation in my psyche around the heightened. And the last night we gathered around a fire outside in the snow in order to share about death. And I found it incredibly beautiful because there was a creation of a space where people could risk talking about what we don't talk about. And it was a very powerful experience for me to name the death of my mentor, who had died actually exactly 2 weeks prior, same time. And to speak that out as the oldest guy there, and Mars, who's probably like 28, picked it up so beautifully. He picked it up so beautifully, my offering, and kind of feathered it out into the whole group. So I'm both being met, like it was so beautiful to be met by him. And then I'm also offering a transmission in some form about leadership, because I'm creating a context where he gets to shine as leader, as a young man in this group of people. And I also noticed I could tell that some people were speaking about death in a group in a way they never had. And that's amazing. That is incredibly beautiful, to just get to stand next to someone and be like, wow, you actually haven't risked this kind of speech before. And we are actually this crew of the moment, we're trustworthy. And then the people who had actually wanted to dance instead of stand around in the cold and talk about, dead people, they came and found us. Like, wait a second, we're supposed to be dancing now. And we're like, well, we're actually not done. We're not done. And so I'm not sure where the story goes from there, but that was a big deal for me.
I'm just thinking about how to discuss my softening on hippiedom.
I can throw a framing, and then you can pick up on it.
Okay.
So I opened the gathering with one of the mental models that I found really useful, which I call the scale of freaking out. And when you're at 0, you're in your comfort zone and everything's relaxed. And it's like, I'm with my people. There's no stress. And when you're at like 3 or 4, it's like you notice there's this tone that's come into your voice, and you're like, you might be kind of snappish with your partner or something like that. There's just a bit of anxiety or stress going on. And when you're at like 7, you're really like losing your composure and not making good decisions and totally tunnel vision. And then when you're at 10, it's like you fall on the floor and you just have a tantrum like a toddler. And that this is a context where you're probably, there's going to be moments where you feel more trust, like Roscoe was just saying, like in the circle, there might be opportunities to do stuff you've never done before, to risk things you've never risked before. And it's really up to you to know where you want to go on your scale, like how much stress do you want to put yourself, how far do you want to get outside of your comfort zone? And if you notice you're at a 3, maybe that's just what you need at the moment. And maybe you're actually like feeling super charged up and resourced, and you can go to a 6 or a 7, you can really get out of your comfort zone. And then notice that you've done that. And then what are you going to do to come back? Like for me, it's like when I've been out to a 7, I need to come and watch like an engineering video on YouTube, like a process of a factory or something like that. It really chills me out. We've all got these different mechanisms for like coming back to center and coming back to ground. And so I wondered, you had some kind of softening, and how far along the scale of discomfort was it for you? How far towards freaking out?
Oh God. So I tend to like keep groups like groupthink or anything that like feels like religious or cultish at arm's length, because I just like, I don't know what it is, but I like just don't want to get subsumed into it. I don't want to accidentally like become in a cult. And I've been in enough like intentional communities when I traveled around the world to know, like, to see like the negative effects of getting caught up in a culture, and just like how you can just lose a lot of agency and autonomy in those in certain scenarios where people are like trying to use an ideology to keep you like controlled, basically. And so I've just like instinctively had a kind of skepticism towards woo-woo type things, just because I think like I tend to try as an anchor to try to think like, did this thing exist 100 years ago that you're saying or thinking? And I think this with all sorts of stuff, like even parenting, like people are like, you have to do, you know, like these little jars of pureed baby food. It's like, well, did that exist 100 years ago? What do people do 150 years ago? And so I generally ask that question to like try to stay normal, I guess. And so, but I think it's led to a kind of reflexive, I guess like just lack of empathy in general towards the woo-woo hippie side of things. Or it's just like, this is not necessarily my vibe, you know, whatever. And when I first got there, I guess a good way to talk about this is when I first got there, Mars is the guy who runs the place, who is our like staff person. And it's like this Burning Man commune or something, a event center. And, you know, he's just like immediately too much detail, like sharing so much of his soul. And I'm just like, oh my God, these freaking hippies, you know, like everybody's just going straight to like sharing their most heartfelt inner self, like wait until we get to know you for a second. So I was like kind of rolling my eyes at Mars at the beginning. And also his name is Mars. It's like everybody has to have like some made up name, you know, it's like so annoying. But as we were going along throughout the weekend, like I noticed that he did a really good job like meeting all of our needs as a group, like in a very practical sense, like in the sense that I feel like a lot of my skepticism towards hippies is like, you know, no one's like cleaning the bathrooms. Everybody wants to just like sit and talk about their like psychedelic experience. No one wants to clean the bathrooms or whatever. And I saw that he was like doing all of that, like hard work, like going and running and getting wood. He was like making the fireplace super nice, like cleaning up after us. And I thought like, wow, this is really cool. He's like holding both of these things at once. And so that like seeing him and then just various like letting myself go into different of the sessions that would have normally been like totally off limits for me. I went into them and just like tried out maybe up to like a 4 or 5 and found it was like, you know, I think that's something that underlies this woo-woo stuff is like people really just want like connection. They want authenticity, meaning, and like they come up with all sorts of weird ways to do it, but so do we all, like, you know, and so do like traditional religions and all of this kind of stuff. Yeah, I guess I'll stop there for now. But you know, I had a moment at the end where I told Mars, like, I came in with some annoying thoughts about you, and I feel bad about that now. And I'm like, I really appreciate everything you've done for us. And I think that it just also is like, there is a really beautiful thing of this culture of like people who are like, I guess, show up vulnerably. There is a like an opposite end of that, which is like my dad and his friends. Of course, they know how to use an impact drill, but they don't talk about their feelings ever. So, you know, I feel like it's good for me to occupy, be empathetic to these ends of the spectrum, if that makes sense, so that I can be like a weaver of people across these differences.
So Ashley, I have to confess, you know, my mama does not call me Roscoe.
Yes. Yes. So I know. So it's like these
I belong to the camp of I've claimed a name.
Yes.
My mama did not give me. So.
Yes. I know. And Roscoe is like a different person to you. I mean, or at least that's what we were talking about when we were at a different side of yourself.
Yeah.
I think I want to say something about what that story about Mars represents to me, which is that part of this meta-modern, multicultural, deconstructed world that we live in is that all of your social categories are completely wrong and they obscure more than they reveal. And people don't want to hear that. Like, people want their categories. You see how freaked out people are getting about gender at the moment. It's like, but this was one thing that was stable. There's 2 of them and they're static. And, you know, like we just want things to be simple and like reliable. But the categories don't actually stack up against reality. Maybe they kind of did in the past, but now it's like extremely obvious that they don't. And so like this idea that there's a group of people that are like hippie or woo-woo or something, it's like, it doesn't, Like the number of different accusations I've heard about what's woo-woo, it's like it doesn't mean anything. Like it's just like some extreme, it's like a hipster or something. It's like this extremely vague sense of like, oh, there's something about them. There must be a group I don't like. That's out group. Ah, yeah, it's the out group. I don't like them. That's not for me. I'm in group. I'm in group, out group, yuck. And a lot of what I'm trying to do is like get the group affiliations out of the room and just give people that encounter with who is this other person? Like, what are the different facets of them? Like, what are the different parts? What are the different, like, what is evoked when you and I come together? Like, what parts of me come forward and what parts of you come forward? And not to arrive with our predefined group identity cards and say, I'm one of these, I'm part of this, I'm one of those, where you're not seeing the person anymore. You're seeing your misconceptions about what you think that person is like. Mm. And that's part of why it feels chaotic, is because you're like, I don't know whose group everyone's in. But it's also what enables the trust to happen, because you're actually meeting a human and you're like, wow, you're another animal. You're another human animal like me. We're in the same species. We live on the same planet. We eat the same minerals. We have the same heartbeat. We have the same, like, there's a kind of embodied practical squishiness that takes over, and you realize how much we have in common when you're not, and especially in the US, when you're not so preoccupied by putting everyone in their right category and making sure that, I don't even understand how you guys work, but like that's like what you described with Mars is kind of like what's happened to me every time I've gotten up close with anyone who was in an out group. Like when I first started hanging out with homeless people, for example, it's like, oh, wow, you're not a category. You're like all of these different experiences that I never had the chance to empathize with. And now that I get to know you, I'm like, wow, that just seems to be part of the human reality, is that we have to simplify the complexity. And in doing so, we like lose a big part of our intelligence. And I want to remind us, like, there's so much detail and complexity and competence and capacity in each of us. And it's just about how you encounter them and how you like call that forward, instead of saying like, oh, I filtered you out. I've already pre-processed you. You're already in that category. Like, yeah, not my one, that one. You're my, the Rolodex approach to life, the Tinder approach to life.
I would just push back a tiny bit in that, in my experience of Microsolidarity, I still wasn't ever really forced to hang out with somebody whose vibes I was like not really attracted to. So that's okay too. Like, I mean, people do have intuition and vibes like of what they resonate with. And I think like there's something in the middle here, this meta-modern synthesis where like it recognize you do have vibes. You there are heuristics, there are ways to like understand people from a distance. You also do have to filter because you don't have infinite time, but also like remain open to the potential. And that's actually a really important insight for doomer optimism too, because we have people who are like rabidly disagree with one another. But they don't have to talk to each other. You don't ever have to work together. We're just talking to all these different people, and that's fine. No one's forcing you. And I thought that was good. Like with Microsolidarity, I was never like some event everybody's expected to go to, like everything's voluntary. And that was very nice for me.
It's one of the ways we make it not a cult.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a constant returning to it's your choice. It's genuinely your choice. And actually dissent is going to be celebrated enthusiastically.
Yeah. And it was funny because I had a couple of dissenting moments, like where I was like, I'm obviously the cultural dissenter here, and I'm just going to say it. And everyone was like laughing and supportive of that, which was great. I didn't feel like I couldn't say it out loud, which I think in a lot of these places you can't really say it out loud, or it's like, oh, you're really harshing the vibe here. We're all trying to have fun or whatever. But instead people were like playful with me with it, where I'm like, oh, this is not my thing. And everyone's just laughing a little bit like, okay, well, let's try it out and see how it goes.
Yeah, I feel called to
Sorry, go ahead.
just say one thing around like the like how undeveloped, it's a generalization, but that I feel so many of us are in our culture to resource ourselves, like when we're in a group environment, or to even know what our needs are. So like I felt there was this one moment, Rich, where you were like, I think it was maybe when we were circling and you just expressed this thing of like, why don't people just do what they need and like do what you want and don't do what you don't want? And it was like this obvious thing for you. And I remember thinking like, yes, I agree. And I wish that I could act from that place all the time, but that there's my own patterns and conditionings and like history means that I often like sometimes when I'm in challenging situations or when I'm overwhelmed or like in that 5+ range, like I sometimes lose touch with my needs. And I think that's like the edginess of this type of environment. Like looking back, like I definitely didn't take enough alone time or rest. I actually ended up like coming down with like a cold by the end of it. And then like that, to me, that's a sign that I like wasn't fully taking care of myself. And that I had maybe lost touch with some of my needs throughout the experience. And I'm grateful for like that learning. And like, that's the edge that I think comes with the anti-cult environment.
Yeah.
Because there isn't someone being like, remember like to drink enough water and like you can always take a nap if you need. And like if you're not enjoying a conversation, you can always walk away. Like these very like basic patterns of agency that so many of us don't come into the world with.
I'm interested, maybe briefly before we go, I guess to talk about, we've talked about this a little bit already, but something that came up a few times were like, it seems like in a lot of these spaces adjacent to what you do, Rich, people like, I'm thinking about like the galaxy brain ecosystem. Everybody's talking about like this ancestral wisdom or like wisdom through the ages, like pulling from philosophies. But it seems taboo to like just talk about either Christianity or just like traditional cultures, especially if they're non-indigenous. Like if it's just like European traditional culture, you like can't talk about it as having any wisdom. I know that you're interested, at least starting to look into religion again, seriously, Rich. And I know, Roscoe, you have had some reading in Christianity. I'm wondering, like, yeah, I don't know. I'm just wondering what the dovetail is between microsolidarity and, like, I guess re-embracing some of our more, like, my actual lineage is Christian, Judeo-Christian, you know? So why do I have to go straight to Buddhism to be, like, enlightened? Maybe that's too much, taking on different cultures to be able to do that. I wonder if we can talk about that a little.
Yeah, well, that's the context of me and Roscoe meeting. So we were at a conference in Berlin and we had lunch together and we were talking. And I think it was you, Roscoe, that said it. At least I attribute it to you. This observation that these kind of meta-modern hipster cultural elite people that we hang out with that are on this like journey of exploring their spirituality and they're like dipping into all of these different lineages. And people are excited because we're going to do a cacao ceremony tonight and there's yoga over there. And there's this like, you know, all these different geographic locations and lineages that have accumulated certain kinds of wisdom. And there's a kind of like the coolest thing to do is to go and sample all these different flavors. And then you have your patchwork spirituality where you're like, I got the best of all these different things. And what Roscoe sort of opened my eyes to was the way that in the spaces that I'm spending time in, Jesus is the big taboo. It's that you can do all of this sampling from other cultures, but the one that like most of my peers have Christian grandparents or great grandparents. That's just the cohort that I come from. And they're all like looking out towards Buddhism and Hinduism and all these other traditions. And Jesus and Christianity is like the most uncool thing ever. So that was kind of what drew us together, was having this conversation. So I'd love to hear more, Roscoe, about that. And then just to say on the microsolidarity front, the scale above the crew I call the congregation, and that was kind of like a note to myself about the value of church, and not what church, I'm not really talking about what religion believes, but what religion does, which is, I grew up in a church congregation. There's like 30 families. The families would meet every Sunday and do church, and then they would pair off and have lunch at each other's places, and the kids would play with each other. And then, like, if something, there was a time we had a farm and we had a big greenhouse, and there was a big storm coming through, and we knew the roof was going to get taken off in the storm. And so literally the whole church congregation showed up, and they like held the roof on with ropes. Like, that's what solidarity is. It's like sometimes you need 150 people on ropes to do something. And if you don't have that, your livelihood's going to be destroyed. So like that's one of the aspects of our traditional heritage that almost everyone is missing now. All the cool kids are missing. There's like plenty of Christians that are like extremely uncool, and they're just like they're not in the podcast conversation. They're not on the tally. Like, they're not in the center of the spotlight. But yeah, I think people need congregations. Even if I say it sometimes, like, even if you don't believe in God, I think if you tried it, you would probably believe in prayer group and prayer circle, like in Bible club, and like coming together and dwelling on things that are important, and like, what is virtue, and like, who are we and where we're going, like doing that in community, having that fellowship, having that pursuit of character and like ethics, and like that's just a very satisfying thing to do. Yeah, I think people need that, even if they don't want to believe that God created the earth in 6 days or whatever it was. Like, that whole stuff that you can decouple those two things, what religion does and what religion thinks. But Roscoe, I'm really wanting to hear, I know that you've got like quite a rich vein there of your experiences with the like more mystical ends of the spectrum of Christianity. And like, how do you make that relevant to normies like us?
Wow. Thank you for that cue. And by the way, I just hit the 10% of battery warning with no plug. So okay, we'll see how long this lasts.
Soon. Yeah.
Hey, so this is the Friday after American Thanksgiving, and I'm out near my parents' house, and my aunt is probably going to die. I mean, she's been dying for a while, but she'll probably die in the next week. And my Aunt Pat was her livelihood was being a third grade teacher in Philadelphia. And along the way, she did the last 10 years of her kind of like coherent life. She's got dementia. She did an annual sermon at her United Methodist Church in Germantown. And her life partner, Jean, put these sermons together in a book, and I've been reading them in preparation for my aunt's funeral. And I'm incredibly proud of my lineage. I also have a grandfather who was a Methodist minister, and it's the beauty and dignity of ordinary life. That's the teaching, is that our lives matter, and that the stories of our lives are actually fully intimate with the Bible stories. That and taking care of each other is the whole point, right? So I see the Microsolidarity gig as very easily mappable to Jesus and the Christian model, which is, it's about community, it's about invitation, and it's about being good to each other. So I don't have a lot, in a lot of ways, I can go on a mystical, metaphysical ride around the nature of the Christ and what that is. And that's been a big part of my life, is the mystery of it all. And the Christ and the Magdalene has a tantra that, tantra seems to belong to the Hindus in the groovy hipster world, but we've got our own profound polarity, a tantra of polarity, right in that story. And in this set of weeks, set of months in my life, the piece that seems most meaningful is direct care. It's somebody has to help my mom use the toilet, and I've got a nephew who's really, really anxious, and so how do we hold him in ways and help him know that we've got him. And yeah, it's funny. Even as I'm speaking right now, I can feel myself get further and further away of some of the metaphysics of it all, and into the place of, isn't it just awesome to? I mean, it's so beautiful when I can feel my heart open in a fierce kindness. And that seems to me to be actually the central thing that Jesus was doing, was he just kept opening his heart in this very fierce, kind, forgiving way. And yeah, so, and now I can feel my words trickling down. If anybody wants to ask me to speak about something else, or, I mean, some aspect of what I just said, I'm a pretty good talker, but in this moment, it feels to serve the actual reality of what it is to be a person living in the world through a kind, appreciative heart seems to be what Christianity is about.
I think that it seems like what we're doing, or at least what resonated with our little crew that we formed, is in some ways just like bifurcating from the galaxy brains who are like deeply in the metaphysical. And I think for us, at least it seems like all of us are on this journey, like toward the mundane, or like the wisdom in like the daily, in like navigating daily decisions. Like, it's really not just about like, I mean, some of these galaxy brain things, you leave like more confused than you came in. You don't really even know what the takeaway is. And like, what we need a lot more of is like tangible ways to be kind to one another, to navigate complex relationships, to care for others and be cared for. So I guess we just need more in-person events. Rich, you got us?
Yeah, I'm on it. I'm thinking about Roscoe's battery dying.
Yep.
And my energy starting to slump. And you're saying takeaways. So I'm like, maybe we should have everyone has to have a takeaway, or like a recommendation for our enormous audience out there. A provocation. I think my one is just like how normal this stuff is. And it's just that there's a growing number of us that are missing it. And so like the advice or the recommendation is like, you just need, every human being needs like 3 or 4 people that they can turn to for very good advice and unconditional companionship. And if you don't have that, that is your number one priority as far as I'm concerned. And if you do have that, your capacity for doing good in the world is astronomical. And it's really fun. Like this is the other thing about Jesus, is his first miracle was to make a whole lot of wine, not just wine, but good wine, like really good wine. And I definitely took that lesson to heart, you know, like it should feel good, should be fun. And the thing of having this like big sense of a mission in the world, if you don't have your companionship, it's not fun. It just becomes this like slog and dries you out. So that's my takeaway. What about you, Steph?
I don't know if I'm ready to go yet.
Well, I want to give Roscoe the opportunity if he can, because his battery might die and then we might lose him. If you're ready.
It's funny. Just because of the last 10 minutes of the conversation, the takeaway I want to drop in is, like, hey, everybody, you're actually smart enough to see through the, like, there's always rigidity and there's always rigidity and a kind of protection from harm that accumulates around any paradigm. right? Christianity has a shit history. Got it. Or the other, whatever the other is rightfully, there's something going on there that we really don't like. I got it, right? But there's a little bit of a, hey, come on, people, like we're actually smart enough not to keep tripping over that rigidity or that brittleness again and again. Like, does seem, Rich, that one of the anchors of microsolidarity is at the heart of it. People are decent human beings who want to belong, want to trust each other, and want to come together for some shared purpose. And that your fellow humans are actually worthy, of coming into close relationship with in order to find shared purpose. Like that's actually what a person is. And so like be smart enough to not buy the bullshit. See through it.
Good.
Yeah.
You ready, Steph?
Yeah, I can I'm really sitting with like this, the beauty of the ordinary and the mundane. One of my takeaways. And the not selling or needing to draw people into this like peak experience, and the value of just being human together, and like appreciating the messiness of that. And then on the other end, like what to build on your takeaway, Rich, around like people really just need these few relationships that resource them. Like that's really, been my takeaway for my inquiry these past couple months, along with this like committing to somewhere. Like it doesn't matter where, but like the moment that I committed to somewhere, I felt it's like I started to grow. I could imagine the roots growing, and then I like felt the branches growing. And I think one of the things that plagues us the most these days is the abundance of option and the paralysis of option. And the value of just actually taking that away from yourself, and having to then find beauty in the ordinary, because you can't just constantly go seeking out the metaphysical or the peak or the foreign, the new shiny thing. It's like, no, I'm actually going to commit to this place where I will then encounter the uncomfortable and the ordinary, and the practice will then be to find beauty in that.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. I don't know that I have anything to add that I haven't already said a million times on this podcast. Like, try to do things with your hands. Try to make relationships with people who are a little bit different from you and see how they go. Meet your neighbors, be friendly with them. If you do these things with other anywhere people. I'm channeling the Beatles. Make it count, make real relationships happen, take away insights, but try to like it's just, we are so alienated, so anything you can do to re-embed yourself in nature, in relationships, in like physical activities, bake a loaf of bread. There's a lot of wisdom in that, more than you would think, I think. So this was really great. Thank you for hosting this Microsolidarity event, Rich, where we all got to meet each other. And onward, I guess, with the mission. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Sisterhood.
Thank you.
yes,
Thank you.
Sarah.
Pleasure.